if there was a need. And then he goes on further in the article and says there wasn't a need. The question is, what is the federal government bringing a person down to a state court trial when they have no interest and no jurisdiction in the case, and they have no prosecutorial control? Let me take a sip here. What was the federal government so concerned about if one of the three doctors was going to be testifying under oath in a state court trial? That they would fly a man down and have him waiting in a hotel room to rebut the testimony in this trial if necessary. The two JAMA articles right here conflict with each other. They make no sense, and what has happened, and their sole purpose was to start out destroying Dr. Charles Crenshaw. And they did this first by trying to have a couple of people play monkey, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, the four doctors in Dallas, and then supporting it with two other doctors who were involved in the autopsy, not realizing that if they stepped back, this whole matter would be exposed and the doctors would be conflicting with each other. If the task was only to determine the cause of death, it explains a lot of things. It explains why they didn't do an adequate autopsy. It explains why they did not dissect the wounds. It explains why they didn't look at the photographs until 3 years later in 1966. And of course, the question comes down to who ordered the autopsy. And although there is speculation, and so far it hasn't been proven specifically who's been involved, we do know, at least according to two of the autopsy doctors, that to their knowledge, Lyndon Johnson was the person who wanted that body removed from Dallas so badly that they were willing to break the law, and of course wanted that body back on the plane with him, that he delayed departure. But beyond the AMA article, putting this into a larger context, we have Robert Groden talking about the Zapruder film and various other photographs, telling us about a frontal headshot. We have Crenshaw as an eyewitness, telling us what he observed. We have Dallas doctors now claiming that they saw nothing at all, and they couldn't see anything because of a shock of hair, while doctors located in the city 3.5 hours away on a plane flight say we didn't even have to take photographs. Or we didn't even have to shave his head to take the photographs because the wounds were so obvious. You draw into this, and if you have had a chance to read David Lipton's book, he talks about an altered body, and you want to use that theory. It does make sense in that we have other people coming forward today talking about altered x-rays, altered films, and of course the body that and the wounds that are claimed today are not consistent with what they saw. Whether you want to believe Lyndon Johnson was a conspirator, co-conspirator, it is clear that he was probably some type of conspirator. And our last speaker, John Newman, who was talking about JFK and Vietnam, got into a subject. I don't know how many people have had a chance to read his book, but even discussing the concept of Kennedy being killed as a result of his interest in de-escalating the war in Vietnam. Up until Newman's book, he states that it had so much emotional impact that aside from one or two scholars, no one would even touch the subject because it was too politically charged. Well, Newman's done that. And if you want to dig into Newman's book further, you can turn to chapter 4 when he was talking about Johnson's wheeling and dealing in Vietnam and concerned by Kennedy that he was out on his own. And of course, we go one step further and we have Johnson's own man and Johnson taking a position that is contrary to Kennedy's, if you believe that Kennedy wanted to de-escalate the war. If that is the case, again, Lyndon Johnson's fingers are right in the pot. And unfortunately, up until today, no one has proceeded in looking at the obvious. No one wants to touch Lyndon Johnson. And we're going to go further today, and we're going to discuss many other things, but it gets a little sickening to me when you have the same name and the same groups of people showing up everywhere with the Warren Commission, with the body, taking the body back, even involved with Vietnam. And considering people don't want to look that way, they should start today. Who created the Warren Commission? Why, wonderful Lyndon Johnson. There is no such thing as a Warren Commission. There is no legal right to a Warren Commission. And anyone that tells you that the Warren Commission was created to eliminate multiple investigations will be able to sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. Because if you look at it legally, we have Lyndon Johnson on the evening of Kennedy's assassination, calling down to Dallas and insisting, now whether they listened to him or not, we don't know, we just know it was done, insisting that Lee Harvey Oswald be charged with being a lone assassin, irrespective of anything else they could prove. And of course that was done. But in the same breath, Lyndon then says, I want you to charge him with the state crime, boys. Charge him with the state crime. But round up all the evidence, and you bring it back up to Washington, D.C. for me. That doesn't make sense. What were they planning on doing? Looking at it in Washington and perhaps establishing and being able to keep a chain of evidence? And then when Lee Harvey Oswald was eventually tried in state court in Texas, ship it back down? That's what he wanted, and that's what happened. People talked immediately after Kennedy's killing about a whitewash. And there were concerns about a whitewash, and perhaps justly so. If the state of Texas did not find a conspiracy, the lone killing of a president in 1963 was not a federal crime. They had the exclusive jurisdiction over that case. And as long as Texas officials insisted that this was a lone assassin, they could do anything they wanted. And that may have been the plan. But unfortunately, if you look at the news accounts, the public and the press didn't like that. And immediately when they made these claims, charges were advanced that a Texas whitewash was going to occur. Another Texas whitewash. And Johnson was in trouble. If Lyndon had left that case in Texas, he would have been politically destroyed really before he began his career as a president. But if Texas officials gave the case up, it wasn't going to go to the Warren Commission. There was no such thing. The case would have gone to the federal government. And the person who headed that department, who would have investigated this case if Texas officials would have relinquished their jurisdiction in this matter, was the Justice Department. And the person that headed the Justice Department on the day of his brother's death was Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy never got his hands in the case. What Lyndon did was 7 days later, he created a Warren Commission, and we can get into the facts about other commissions that they were talking about, creating a commission in Texas. He first proposed that, and that didn't work. That still got some people upset. So what he does is he creates a Warren Commission. And the Warren Commission is going to review this, and they're made up of these wonderful moral men. They're going to review the evidence in closed session. the evidence of a public crime in closed session. Why? Because they don't want the public to hear everything to jump to the wrong conclusions. I'll tell you, I've seen a lot of trials, and except for juvenile cases, they usually don't have closed session courtroom hearings. And the reason for that is because the public is entitled to know. But by the creation of the Warren Commission by a presidential order, the public was denied this right. And if you happen to read Mark North's book, Act of Treason, while North disagrees with me and he believes that Hoover was more involved, I'm not going to argue with Mark North, but if you turn to Mark North's book starting at page 485, you'll start seeing that all the time the Warren Commission is meeting this impartial tribunal, Lyndon's on the phone, talking to him 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day talking. Maybe they were talking about the weather. Maybe when Chief Justice Earl Warren, who you would assume would be a brilliant trial lawyer, was told by Jack Ruby that he had something real significant to say, maybe, as the person who headed all the other lawyers in the country, a light would have gone off and he should have said, "What is it?" But he forgot. And of course he forgot to pull Ruby out of Dallas. And one scenario you can draw from this is that while Ruby remained silent, as you can probably tell from subsequent communication, of course, government psychiatrists looking at Ruby said he was crazy, but he was blaming Lyndon in referring to a Texans book written in 1964, J. Evetts Haley, telling us what a son of a bitch Lyndon Johnson was in 1964, but no one believed him. Of course, now Robert Caro was telling us that, and Caro won a Pulitzer Prize for his first volume on Lyndon Johnson. In his second volume, where he got into a little too much truth about Lyndon Johnson, the press has trashed that work. But when you look at North's book, irrespective of whether he and I disagree, it is clear that Johnson has his fingers in the pudding again, calling the shots. And of course we know that a Warren Commission wound everything up just before Lyndon's big election with Barry Goldwater in 1964. And of course this was the kiss that made him go over the top. And now instead of being landslide Lyndon by winning a senatorial election by 100 stolen votes, he wins a presidential election by the largest landslide in victory. Johnson requested the body moved out of Dallas. He made the order that the limousine be shipped out of Dallas and eventually working its way up to Detroit, Michigan, before Kennedy was even put in the ground. If you or I would have done that, chances of us being charged and indicted with tampering with criminal evidence probably would have been pretty strong. But if you're a U.S. president, you're allowed to do that. He orders an aide to go get Kanye's shirt. He makes a telephone call, says, charge Lee Harvey Oswald with being a lone assassin. Wind up the evidence, put it in the Allied van and ship it up here to me. He telephones Crenshaw and says, get a deathbed statement from this man, Lee Harvey Oswald. We know from Newman he's involved with signing a document 2 days or 3 days later. It changes our course in Vietnam. We know he has contact with the Warren Commission. We know he, for some reason, managed to keep the case away from Bobby. We know that he told the Warren Commission that he wanted rumors of the worst kind stopped. And of course, we know, based on the Warren Commission's recommendation, Lyndon decided to lock the boxes afterwards. Any other point in time, any other case, if you have a man who is a prime suspect, no matter how wonderful, no matter how moral, I don't even care if it's the Pope, you don't let them become involved in a criminal investigation. In fact, that may be the first thing written in every single book that relates to police investigations. Don't let a suspect get involved. If the chief of police is a suspect, even a potential suspect, in the murder of his wife, you think he should be handling the evidence? You think he should appoint a group of people who are his friends to review it? You think that he should later decide to have closed sessions and then eventually seal the evidence and keep it away for life? Of course not. And if you do allow a criminal suspect to become involved, what happens is there is a possibility that the crime may never be satisfactorily solved. You'll have people running around for their lives, trying to figure something out. But there may not be anything left to figure out because the evidence may be gone. And it could be gone by unwitting actions of other people merely following orders. Throw that away, seal this up, take this over here, following orders. They don't have to be conspirators. And especially if the United States President is making those orders in telling you it's national security purposes. And take yourself back to 1963 when we were involved with the Cold War, and there's a possibility that the Russians may invade or Castro may be coming onto the shores in Cuba. You're going to do what you're told. And it may not come directly from the president. He may only make the important calls, such as get a deathbed statement, charge this man with only being a lone assassin, bring the evidence up here. He may have aides do the other things. Get the shirt, get the car. We look at Lyndon Johnson as a suspect. You have to look at his motive, his opportunity, access, and of course, included in part of that is timing. How would this crime benefit such a person? And of course, although people don't like to say this, the truth of the matter is, every police investigator that looks at a crime considers character evidence to some degree. I'm a lawyer, and if I'm involved in a crime, why don't you step out here for a minute? We have this wonderful policeman, and I want you to let you know that I have a history of trickery, deceit, thievery, fraud, extortion. He's a wonderful moral man, and the two of us are in the room, and one of us is perhaps the subject of stealing a lady's purse. In terms of investigating both of us, one of the first things anyone would look at is our background, our character. That wouldn't be the only thing, and that wouldn't give somebody a pass, but it's a start. And when you look at Lyndon Johnson's character, and of course, all politicians, as John Newman was saying, are political animals, but we know, at least according to one of his good friends, Billy Saul Estes, in order to stop a national scandal from destroying him as a vice president, he was involved with two other men in the killing of agricultural agent Henry Marshall. We can go back and look at other events. And if we look at a book written by Dr. Doris Kearns, a White House fellow who Johnson brought in to write a biography about him, of course I imagine it'd have to be something flattering. She wrote LBJ and the American Dream, great book. Wonderful about Lyndon. She states in page 12 of her introduction that the way Lyndon Johnson solved problems was by the use of personal force. Now, I'll let Dr. Kearns explain what she stated, but that's what she said. And this is a person close to him. Was the vice presidency a problem for Lyndon Johnson? Well, of course, we all know how he got on the ticket. In 1960, he ran an unannounced campaign. There's in one book, whether it's written by Bobby Baker or Kearns or Goldman or anyone else, which won't tell you that Lyndon Johnson's sole goal in life was to become U.S. president. Sole goal in life. Maybe Dan Quayle's sole goal in life is the same thing. But we do know that in 1960, his decision was to run an unannounced presidential campaign and try and steal the nomination away from the party's lead contender while the nomination occurred on the floor. He was going to grab it away. And in 1959, even before the election really got underway, he already had $1 million in his war chest at his unannounced campaign headquarters in, of all places, Dallas, Texas. And when Lyndon didn't win, and Kennedy rolled to victory in the first ballot, Lyndon, and of course there's several versions as to how he actually got on the ticket, but for some way he managed to get on the ticket, and that starts things, which is fine. However, there were some more problems occurring for Lyndon, and one of them is he had a health history problem. In 1955, he had a major heart attack, incapacitated him for 6 months. No big deal. But he knew he was running just like his old man, and just like every other male member of the Johnson family. No male member ever lived beyond the age of 60. They all died of heart problems. 1955, Johnson knew this. He was Kennedy's right-hand man. He stepped down from the Senate majority position, second most powerful position in the country, to take the lesser position of vice president. Why? According to one news reporter who interviewed him afterwards, because he had done a little research and he had come to the conclusion that 1 out of every 4 presidents dies in office and he's a gambling man. When you combine Johnson's knowledge of his own health history with the facts, it becomes clear that unless Johnson stepped up to the presidency, the only time he'd be able to run would be 1968. 1968, he would have been 60 years of age, the exact same age his father was when he died, 1 year older than his own. Of course, running a very strenuous campaign, and we now know whether it was his health problems, domestic problems in the Vietnam War, we know he didn't run again. And we know that with the advancement of medical science, he did manage to live a little bit longer than the rest of the male members of the Johnson family. He lived 5 years longer, and then he dropped over dead of a heart attack. When you look at those facts, and combine it with the fact that the Kennedy inner circle was belittling him, he was used to being the center of attention. He had spent 30 years wheeling and dealing in Washington, all for the purpose of being a U.S. president. And here he is being outside and being mocked as that. We got Johnson then involved with 3 national scandals. Spiro Agnew resigned as a result of one. Johnson, of course, Billy Small-Estes managed to ride that out as a result of killing of agricultural agent Marshall. The second one, TFX airplane matter, we won't get into that, but he wrote that out. The third one, of national significance, was the Baker scandal, starting right up in the fall of 1963 and going all the way to the day of Kennedy's death. On November 22nd, Life magazine produced a expose by its 9-member task force attempting to unearth the ties between Johnson and Bobby Baker, who of course resigned in disgrace. And when you really look at the facts, aside from 1 or 2 trips away from Dallas, when the blank hit the fan, Johnson took off for his ranch, getting ready for almost a month to give JFK a big Texas welcome. And he didn't emerge until the day of his death. And you add those facts in with the fact that not only was he involved in scandals, but Democrats were already conceding that Johnson had outlived his political usefulness. The fact that Texas Democrats said as early as April of 1963 that if Johnson remained on the ticket with Kennedy for 64, the state of Texas would swing to Goldwater. The fact that Kennedy's sister as early as 1962 said that Johnson was going to be dumped from the ticket. If Johnson was dumped from the ticket or was forced to resign as a result of a national scandal, i.e. the Bobby Baker affair that was just getting heated up at the time of Kennedy's death, all his years of political wheeling and dealing were lost. For himself, that represented millions, that represented his dream, and for his friend, it represented billions. Opportunity. Mentioned before, if you step into something, you should at least investigate and determine what it is. When you got a vice president of the United States being part of the inner circle to plan Kennedy's trip, and he has intimate knowledge of all of the details of the trip, perhaps it's worthwhile to at least look and see if he could have perhaps been involved. Because if you want to kill somebody, it's good to know where they're going, and it's even better to plan for them. And of course, Johnson and his cohorts planned for JFK. And if you read Jerry Bruno's book, Kennedy's Advance Man, called The Advance Man, you will see that in October of 1963, Bruno got into a heated argument over the motorcade route with Johnson's Texas cohort. And of course, Bruno lost the argument, and Kennedy was slain. You look at the facts further. Who were the people urging the president to make this trip? Wasn't Adlai Stevenson, was it? I think he had a little problem at the UN when he went down there. And the person who sort of created the problem was John Connally, because the day before, he proclaimed in Texas, U.S. Day. And that caused a controversy. Beg your pardon?
Didn't Senator Yarborough correct?
There has always been a dispute as to whether or not Yarborough was involved or who was involved and whether it was actually settled. A feud occurring in Texas, John Connally in a Life magazine article written in 1967 indicated that if it was really to settle the feud between Yarborough and the Johnson camps, it wouldn't have been done in Dallas or anywhere in Texas, but Kennedy would have walked across the street in Washington, D.C. and tried to get the two men resolved. And of course, one of the things that may have been a motive, it may have been a trap, I don't know, I'm speculating, is that if you are a president and you are planning on dumping your vice president, who is a Texan, and he knows lots of wealthy Texans who supported you heavily in your first campaign, before you dump them, maybe you better get to meet them. And maybe you better go on the trip. So you're on a first-name basis with them, so you and your new running mate may have a chance of getting some funds for your next campaign coming up. Whether that was Kennedy's purpose or not, I don't know. But it certainly wasn't to settle a political faction between two fighting Democratic groups, and it had perhaps a more likely possibility of being a trip to advance his plans for the 64 presidency in light of knowing he was going to dump Johnson from the ticket. When we look at the timing of the assassination, Goldwater, while he had a motive, because he was planning obviously on running against him, and he won the Republican Party nomination in 1964, probably didn't benefit from the timing of this assassination. Why? Because you can look at the 1968 problem with Robert Kennedy. You can see how timing can benefit a party or not benefit a party. In October of 1963, Johnson was taking heat, and he was going down the Baker scandal, and Kennedy publicly stated that he had given the green light to let the investigation proceed to its ultimate end. And the press was having a field day. And so if you really want to bump off Kennedy from a conservative perspective, you don't do it then, because what would happen would be you're missing 3 or 4 or 5 months of political propaganda against the other party. And then perhaps, maybe in April or May, if you kill the president when his administration's already been tarnished by a vice president and there's no secondary strong person around, your party is in disarray. And of course that's what happened in '68. But in terms of timing, by pure happenstance or perhaps by deliberate design, killing of John F. Kennedy stopped the scandals from destroying Lyndon Johnson, allowed Johnson to take the reins and establish himself as a president among all of us, with still a fear factor involved. It would have been a 2 or 3 year period out. Chances are we would have known Johnson a little bit better and would not have voted him in as by such a great landslide as what occurred. And additionally, if you look at what John Newman was talking about, and if you want to believe that there was a Vietnam motive, and we do know that Johnson had some knowledge of the Vietnam problem and was siding with people that Kennedy was disagreeing with. And since we know that Kennedy was talking about de-escalating the war in Vietnam, the timing, all of this played right in the role of Lyndon Johnson. I'm not going to get into admissions and statements made by other people, but one thing I want to ask you, this bothers me as a lawyer, that's a Jack Ruby trial. Ruby, and in fact I mentioned this in the book, I say, how do you get a guilty man free? One of the ways you get a guilty man free is you have a mistrial before the case ever starts. People get all their emotions out, they give them the death penalty, they can scream and yell and write everything in the paper. And then 2 or 3 years later, the case goes up on appeal, gets reversed, and everybody's emotions are gone at that point. In this case, and of course we don't have Chief Justice Earl Warren involved in this one, at least not as a sitting judge. But we do have a man who shot somebody in cold blood in a city. And it was obvious to every single person in that city that that was not a fair forum for a trial. And a motion was made at the start, before the case ever got underway in Dallas, to remove it, to get it to someplace fair. And the trial judge, who happened to have obtained the services of a press agent, decided that Dallas was fair, and in spite of 200 Dallasites saying that the case should be removed, he decided that that case be heard right in Dallas, Texas. And of course, that case was heard in Texas. And Ruby went down. But of course, the case went up on appeal. Appellate court looked at it, said what occurred in this case shocks the conscience of the court. And they summarily reversed it. And they said, how dare you, trial Judge Brown? How dare you not remove this case and put it into a fair forum? Before the case ever started, a mistrial had already occurred. When you look into Judge Brown, we have somebody's finger there again. Lyndon Johnson's friends. We do know today that they, through one of their publishing entities, signed a book contract with the judge after the trial. At least that's what they've admitted. Again, they brought him out to California, gave him a little trip there, had him at their racetrack. If you look at it, we have Johnson's friends having private contact with the trial court judge who commits a mistrial, and of course that mistrial is summarily reversed, giving Ruby a new trial, and whether you want to believe he was murdered or merely had cancer and died as a result, the important thing is that as a result of that case being reversed, Ruby's trial lawyers were already negotiating with the Dallas DA to not try Ruby again, but to release him for the time served. He was going to walk. He was going to walk after three and a half years. Ruby died. You believe what you want. I have my own conclusions. But I think as he sat in that pen there, in that Dallas jailhouse, and instead of staying quiet, started passing notes out, saying, hey, look at Lyndon. When he started talking a little too much, giving too many innuendos, of course everyone thought he was crazy. He died. I wrote my book not for the purpose of being an expert. And I always tease people when I say if I would have had another year or two, my book would have been 10 or 20 pages shorter. And I'm not a researcher. I read. And what I try to do in my life, this is what I do with my job, is I take minutia from all over the place and I try and figure it out through a reasonable, common sense solution. Sometimes I'm right. Sometimes I'm wrong. Sometimes when I'm presenting a case to a jury, my reasonable solution may not be the truth. But the trier of fact decides that. And some people have said, Craig, you didn't go far enough with what you're saying about Johnson. I kind of sit back and I say, I didn't go far enough. No one let me on television for all the Rivera got me on. When I was supposed to show up for another one, I was instructed that we weren't going to talk about the subject of my book. As you can probably tell from the Chicago Sun-Times article, they forgot I exist. And last time I was in Chicago, speaking at the Chicago International Film Festival with Oliver Stone, I don't know, I think we had 8 or 10 people there. They forgot I exist again. I didn't show up. I think I was like 2 away from Oliver, and I talked half an hour or so. I didn't show up. Why is that? It's so simple. Why is that? Some people say that accusing a vice president of any criminal conduct, especially involving an assassination, is un-American. We've all read Robert Grove's book, and we know there are passages in there. He makes implications. Jim Mars' book. Lots of books. And all I'm trying to do is tell you, it's enough whispering. It's enough whispering. If it is obvious dig, maybe it won't show anything. But for God's sakes, if it is there, it should be investigated. And it shouldn't be the government in the press that restricts this investigation. Some people say that a crime, a right-hand man assassination, a coup of any sort, can't happen in America. Well, I guess that's perhaps because we have different politicians here Maybe they're more moral, more honest, more wonderful. But that's contrary to history. Any point in time, any civilization, you can find a right-hand man assassination because that's human nature. Some people have greed. Some people will do things to take the chance to obtain their position in the sun. And they'll do anything to do it. Africa, when the Zulu tribe controlled 2/3 of the continent of Africa, right-hand man assassination. Kings in the Bible, Adolf Hitler, a right-hand man assassination attempt. Historians now claim that it was an attempt to kill Hitler to help the American war effort, but that wasn't true if you really look at it. It was some old guard Germans who were jealous of Hitler, had made decisions as to how they were going to divvy up the power, and attempted to bump him off. Saddam Hussein, as the right-hand man assassin, right-hand man, he attempted a right-hand man assassination. It was unsuccessful, but he eventually became a leader. And as a result, during our conflict over there, people always were surprised, but Saddam didn't let anybody but members of his close family arrange his trips. And he moved on an impromptu basis. Perhaps Saddam knew more about the Kennedy assassination than any of us. And if you look at political assassinations as a whole, they break down into 3 separate types. Political assassinations designed to foment a revolution. Assassinations by a lone assassin or a demented person. Or internal coups, power grabs from within. In the first 2, foment the revolution or bring about change, or lone assassins or martyrs, almost every time when the act occurred, they disclosed their purpose. I did it for love of a movie star. I did it to help the Armenian cause. I did it for the popular movement of whatever. They disclosed their cause. In this case, no one disclosed their cause. No one disclosed their reason. Lee Harvey Oswald, as a lone assassin, even though the Warren Commission said he was sane, didn't leave any records behind, didn't make any public proclamations, and in fact told everyone that he admired the president. If you look at this assassination, it fits the 3rd pattern, and that is a power grab from within. If you have a power grab from within, people involved do not disclose their purpose. The people involved remain silent and attempt to grab power, and if they disclose their purpose, there may be repercussions from the other leader's staff. In this case, the lone assassin doesn't fit. Fomenting a revolution of change doesn't fit, but an internal coup does. And when you look at the way the press is treating all of us, and politicians are treating all of us, and the actions taken immediately after the assassination, by not disclosing much to us, by seizing evidence, it certainly appears to fit the pattern of a power grab from within. Now, Oliver Stone's movie came out. Jack Valenti said that Stone's movie, and anyone sort of siding with him or believing a conspiracy of any sort exists, is Nazi. They're spewing propaganda. And if you look what the press has been doing to all of us, they believe in the same thing. Most of us are operating under the misconception that journalists owe a duty to society, to be guardians of morals. They owe an ethical duty to be accurate, to be true to whatever we don't know. But that is directly contrary to the purpose, the freedom of the press. It is directly contrary to what our forefathers said in the Federalist Papers. The purpose of the press is to expose government, and not to be a censor of the people, but to be a censor of government. And what has been happening in this case, as Mr. Asner was talking about on Friday, with perhaps most of the major media organizations being controlled by 10 or fewer entities, it is clear that they are no longer acting as a censor of government and a guardian of our rights. And as was recently shown in the banking scandal, in the post office scandal, in the savings and loan scandal that has now been disclosed at the press, and those inside the Washington Beltway knew about it before the 1988 election, but they didn't reveal it until afterwards, and it wasn't made a campaign issue by either of the two opponents. The public is losing confidence in the press, and as evidenced by the third party in our upcoming presidential election, they're also losing confidence in our politicians. If Mr. Stone's movie has shown anything, it has demonstrated this loop between government and the press, and demonstrated that we as Americans are outside the loop, and they have no interest in us. For anyone to come here and to advance a position, whether it be the truth or not, that is contrary to our government, a challenge to our government, and a challenge to the press, deserves to be honored rather than chastised by such organizations. And as a result, by your attendance in this symposium, by your work, and I know a number of you have written articles and books, I applaud you, and thank you very much for being a true American. Thank you.
I'm going to go up this aisle on both sides to start with. We'll start with Mark Chinnick.
Hi. In your book, at one point, you talk about some things that were public knowledge in Dallas were being spoken about publicly. And then you go to the notes in the book, and there's no citations to where any of that information is coming from.
In terms of which specific item?
I'd have to look back at the book to find that specific item, but it's talking it's talking about a statement that somebody was making regularly in public, there was common public talk. There's nothing indicated where the source of this is.
Just so you understand, it's one of the problems is we try to get the book out in 38 days. And as a result of that, it comes through, and in fact, there are spelling errors, there are typographical errors, but almost all of the sources, I did no individual research. Unlike most of you, I didn't have a tape recorder or video camera or anything else, and what I really tried to use was sort of undisputed evidence, even though there have been discussions that one of the things that happens is you can have an inaccuracy compounded by each researcher using that as authority. But there is backup to almost everything here. Whether it got in there or not, I don't know.
As I remarked to you earlier when I spoke to you, I give presentations, and I was surprised that the Texans who have been in my presentation who have stood up and said that after my presentation, which is not at all based on your thesis, that they felt definitely that Lyndon was involved, and I thought that was interesting. The question I have for you is about the Yarborough-Johnson thing. I'm having trouble in my mind reconciling if Lyndon knew beforehand or was involved in this beforehand, not just afterhand. Why would he let his friend and former campaign manager Connolly go into the death car with Kennedy rather than let Yarborough go, which was what your wife said?
There was a fight, supposedly,
Right.
this is by, and I don't know if people know this or not, but on that Thursday evening, between Johnson and Kennedy over the seating arrangements for that Friday. And it related to getting Senator Ralph Yarborough out of the car with Johnson and getting Connolly into the car with Johnson and Yarborough into the seat which Connolly was eventually shot at. Now, of course, the question comes down to, because there were problems between Lyndon and Yarborough before that evening. And in fact, there was a supposed snub of Lyndon Johnson by Yarborough, I think either on that morning or the afternoon before that. But the question in which I can't decide is because you're looking at this. If you really read into Lyndon Johnson's background, he was a very devious person. And if he has some knowledge of this, one of the things he does is he takes and creates an incident or a snub as an excuse to make this transfer of these two people. Now, whether that's the facts or not, I don't know, but we do know that Lyndon did have the argument, he lost the argument, and his buddy did end up getting shot.
He did have access to naval records, both through court and through Connolly. He might have, and Hoover probably might have given him access, found that Lee Harvey Oswald a letter.
You just mentioned something, and that's an interesting point, which, if you really want to get into it, so you understand this, one of the things is when I'm writing something as a lawyer, people say, well, geez, why did you get into this guy more? Why did you go over there? I don't want to get sued. And if somebody's alive, although I could make an allegation or something like that based on my license and everything else, why should I? And so what I did was I either ignored it, or you could probably glean by reading the book, if there's somebody alive, as to who could have possibly also been involved. Next question.
Yes, sir. As Robert wrote and showed us again yesterday, most of us are familiar with the swearing of Johnson on the plane Air Force One. Here's Carl Elbert winking at Lyndon Johnson. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Sure, famous wink.
Have you looked, is Carl Elbert asked why? Or have you looked into anything more with that? It seems like a very odd time for somebody to wink. And I don't mean to be naive, but I'm just asking.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. And if I could have, because we were going to press, part of the thing is acquiring photographs and receiving the release for it. If I could have obtained that, I would have put that in. And it's kind of interesting because I had an article in there from the Albuquerque Tribune or something, I can't remember specifically. We already published a book before I ever got their consent. I mean, don't tell them that, but so that was my problem. When it came to something like that, you kind of run on the line as to whether you should do it or not.
Next question.
Yeah, I wanted some follow-up on what you said earlier. Why did you feel that, was the pressure put up upon you to release the book in 38 days? Why was there a time crunch on that? And why did you yourself not, I believe you just said that you did not personally do any research in the book or something like that? Is that what you
I didn't do investigative research like most of you, and that is go visit people, take their personal statements, do your own videotaping of interviews with them. For example, mark up here. I don't know how many you have or what you've done, but I haven't done that. Now your question, what was the first part?
Why is there like a time crunch to get it out in 38 days?
Here's the problem, at least from my perspective. I have been working on it just as a hobby like most of you. And Stone's movie was in the can. There was 120 hours of film. They were cutting it down to 3 hours. They wouldn't reveal what it was about. And you start thinking to yourself, you say, for God's sakes, I've been working on this all this time, and if he goes into this, it's going to look like I copied him. So as such, there was an attempt to get it out. In terms of self-publishing, I contacted Kent Carroll of Carroll and Rock, very nice man, and in the last summer. I attempted to have him do it, but he was working on Mark Morris' book. And he told me basically, kid, if you want it out before the movie, forget it. It says it takes 18 to 24 months. Contacted one or two other publishers. Same time frame. I contacted a company who was mentioned in Megatrends as being able to turn a book around in 3 months. They would send it to Hong Kong, called Tiger's Eye Press. They were booked up for 3 years. So that's the reason we decided to self-publish. And by the time we got down to it, because then what happened was, I just put it off. I wasn't even going to do it. I thought, well, I'll just keep continuing. And in about September of '91, I was talking with my father. You're talking about things in the overall context of life, and perhaps having a little bit more wisdom than me. He said, hey, listen, you only live once. You go because you'll never have another chance. So that's why, at that point, really starting at late September, early October is when we really began.
Next question.
Yes, I just wondered if you encountered the fact that that LBJ also committed, or had somebody commit arson with regard to voting records stored.
Sure.
Yeah, all right. And the other one was, there were a team of 5 IRS people after Lyndon. And he calls, this is in his early career, he calls FDR, and FDR then says they lay off boys. So you're really talking about a series of old boy networks still at work, crossing over into the mafia and so on. Whoever, it's a connection of old boy networks, basically.
You are absolutely right, and in fact, people always say to me, they say, hey, how can you say Johnson was such an SOB? The truth of the matter is, what he was doing was practicing old line Texas politics, and that's the way it was done. And he may have gone a little overboard in some areas, but it was ruthless politics, and that was a standard practice in that. That was a Wild West time. What you're talking about there in terms of Johnson seeking FDR's approval on that also relates to Brown and Root and the scandal into that, and I mean, you can go on and on. But you're absolutely, even the FCC, when you start that, you know what I'm talking about?
Right, it wasn't his wife's fortune at all.
Sure, but when you go beyond that, you can look at his mentor's nephew was one of the chair people on the FCC involved with the licensing, and that, of course, gets into how Johnson started acquiring television stations. You should understand that the way I just happened to get involved in this, as a kid, right after the assassination, I read Haley's book. I got a hold of it, I was in 4th grade, and I developed an interest in Johnson, not in the assassination per se. And I began reading on Johnson, and that's where I was spending my time, and as an offshoot of that, I began reading about the assassination, and finally, probably 73 or 74, came to the conclusion, I thought, well, geez, this guy may have done it. And if you really go back, that's one of the things, everybody has thought this, whether you wanted to admit it or not. Everybody has thought it at one point in time. Europeans have talked about it and openly written about it from day one. When Johnson went to Australia as a president, he was greeted with placards there, people holding up signs saying, "Go home murder." So, aside from just our little island and the barriers we put up, everybody's been talking about it and sort of accepting it from day one. And the press, Gerald Ford and everyone else doesn't even want to look into it.
Craig, before we take the next question, the name of that author and the title of the book again that you read when you were in the 4th grade? That Haley book?
J. Evetts Haley. Name of the book was paperback book. I don't know if it's, someone told me it was going to come out in a reprint.
It's being sold.
It's out. It's out.
Oh, it is?
Yes.
And you know, let me just ask you this question, because I don't even know this. Is he still alive? Because I heard about 3 months ago, somebody said he was dead.
He's alive, 3 months ago.
Yeah. A study of, a Texan looks at Lyndon, a study of illegitimate power.
And Texas looks at Lyndon, a study of illegitimate power.
Yeah, did you say there's some books out there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it still $1.25?
$3.50.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Not bad. Next question.
What were your, the second scandal, you said someone, airplane?
Let me tell you this, for example. I didn't discuss, I mean, if you really want to get into it, this was not a national scandal at that point in time. Coming down right in October of '63, there was a Texas hot oil scandal. Lyndon and Lady Bird were subpoenaed. They never showed up, never testified, but that was sort of a minor scandal. The TFX airplane one involved, of all people, Jim Wright, who was here on Friday. I don't think he really liked me that much, I don't know. But Wright, Fred Court and Johnson, and Fred Court took the position of John Conlon when he left to run for governor. And what that basically involved was, there was a new plane that was coming out. There was bidding between Boeing and TFX. In fact, interestingly enough, that is why some people say that Kennedy flew from Fort Worth to Dallas, because if he would have driven, and this is just people talking, but if he would have driven, he would have had to take the limousine ride right past the General Dynamics plant. And that would have reminded the press and the public about Johnson's scandal.
Do you mention one more thing? Do you mention anything about Tony Schwartz, who was the advertising director during his '64 campaign when he came up with the mushroom commercial?
I don't know if I get it. I think I discussed that very briefly in terms of either Johnson's election or his career, but since that really relates to post-assassination activities that I couldn't see relating at all to the assassination, aside from perhaps securing the election, I didn't get into it.
Craig, you might be interested in an end note in my book, Emperor Immortal, indicate that when Johnson wanted advice on whether he should go into the Dominican Republic, he organized a distinguished panel of people who would give him such advice. Every member of the panel had a major sugar interest. And if you explore that further, they all ultimately infrastructure with the TFX scandal to the Court and to Warren Commission members, to lawyers. It's an incredible thing. It's a kind of replication of the Warren Commission all over again, this time to intervene in the Dominican Republic. I think you'd like that one. Next question.
Perhaps the reason the press is treating him as a non-person is because Lyndon Johnson, although he got us into Vietnam apparently, he was the architect of the Great Society.
Do you believe
civil
that?
rights?
Do you believe that? That's not true at all. Have you read anything on Johnson?
Well, I've read the
He took what Kennedy was working on, but Kennedy hadn't implemented and plugged it in. And that is consistent with his goal of creating a great society, because what he wanted to do is he wanted to go down in history, not only as a U.S. president, but a great president, up on the walls compared to Napoleon and Caesar. And what he did was he grabbed Kennedy's programs, and whether Kennedy would have ever gotten into it, I don't know, because interestingly enough, part of the things that Kennedy was proposing were supposed to be implemented early in his administration, but they never got that far.
Okay, next question.
This is a testimony. Hasn't this man done the best job? You've seen the moderating the audience questions and answers.
Next compliment, question. Next question.
Well, for what it's worth, in November 1988, I heard an interview with Pierre Salter, and after he had said that he had never had any reason to doubt the Warren Commission, and so on, then when he was asked a question, he said that Kennedy went to Texas because Lyndon Johnson advised that he come there.
I'll accept that.
And also, I was wondering if you are going to pursue this any farther, and whether you might look into the possibility of the man who Billy Saul Estes alleges was Johnson's hitman, Malcolm or Mac Wallace, and his possible participation in the Kennedy assassination.
Whether I'm going to pursue it or not, I will still do reading. I'm very interested in the area. Whether I'll write another book or not, I have no idea. To be honest with you, if you're ever thinking of doing a book, use a publisher, because this burns all ends. And when you get down to it at the end, you're supposed to try and collect the money they owe you. They never pay you. So you get like this. So it's really, in terms of doing something, I'm a little hater from just trying to proceed on this book.
Thank you. Next question.
First, thank you for your time and your presentation. We all appreciate it very much. I was wondering if you could confirm and or elaborate on what Henry Wade told me in his office a few weeks ago concerning the statement he made on national TV about Lee Harvey Oswald, that he was guilty beyond a moral certainty. And he made reference to a change of venue at Oswald lived concerning a possible trial. And I was wondering if you could elaborate or confirm that as to what he meant. I didn't have the guts to ask him.
Well, let's start with this. The only reason you asked me a question, I know, because you told me you wanted to get on camera. But beyond that, in terms of Wade asking for removal of the Lee Harvey Oswald trial, I can't tell you on that one or not. But he was the man who put the one affidavit in and who opposed the removal by Belli of getting Ruby's trial out. And interestingly enough, and this bothered me as a lawyer, here Henry Wade talked with Ruby, and considering there was this insanity defense and what type of condition he was in, at least once, perhaps twice, from the assassination of Kennedy until the murder of Oswald. And so he was an eyewitness. And of course, he also knew Ruby at times before this. And the thing I could never understand when that case was going, and especially when you knew you had a problem, is I would have, the first witness for the defense, I would have put Wade on. Because, or just when they were going to start the trial. Because he's getting it all prepared and getting ready, throw him on and that knocks him out of the box. Now the assistant, who probably was trying most of the case anyways, has got to try it. But that certainly bears the hell out of him. And that would be the way to start the case out.
Next question.
You made that reference to letters Jack Ruby smuggled out of his jail cell. Do you or would anyone else here know, are any of those available, or do they exist? And do people have them in their private questions?
Ruby's letters?
Yeah, you say he insinuates or points the finger at Johnson.
I'm not insinuating, in fact,
well,
this man right that just asked the question before, Mark Oakes, just transferred over to the JFK Assassination Information Center, what was it, how many days ago? About 6 weeks ago, one of Ruby's letters. Wow. Well done.
And another question on a different note. What's your opinion of the actual assassination itself and Oswald's involvement, or do you think other shooters and stuff like that?
From a personal perspective, I believe it was a patsy that couldn't use that weapon, and we can get into all of that material. In terms of whether it was one shooter, 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't know.
One of Ruby's letters was published in Ramparts in February of '67. And a big deal about it.
Others have been published in books.
Yes, they are. Next question.
Now, Craig, I understand that you say that you were not an investigator, but you used information from the books and articles that you had read. You mentioned one particularly interesting bit of information, that is the book contract, book of advance, free trip to California for Judge Brown after the verdict had come in on Ruby was on appeal. Now, that was the Murkison family. The Murkison Wynn families surfaced many, many times as you start looking closely at the events that happened just before and just after the assassination, either them or through the Great Southwest Corporation. My question is this, did you see any newspaper or magazine articles on that Judge Brown offer? I know you gave a book as a source, but have you yourself seen?
No, I didn't look at that.
No other author has mentioned it. Now,
I'll tell you, I'm trying to think, it was also maybe in, check Melvin Belli's book.
I read it, it's not in there.
Yeah, I have to look. By the way, let's just put that microphone back in your hand. Let me ask you this question. So even though we didn't have a chance to get into this, do you know anything about the Robert Kennedy shooting?
I was there at the time. My feeling was that some of the same forces were involved.
Was Sergeant Serhian somehow connected with this same group you were talking about?
Win Murchison, not to my knowledge.
Did he work anywhere?
Not to my knowledge, nothing of significance. But he had no more grievances against Bobby Kennedy than I did. The thought that came to my mind after I looked into it, and I came to the conclusion, and lo and behold, I read Paris, the book on Garrison's case, and on page 269, he's talking, Paris Lamont, page 269 I think it is, this is in late 68 after Bobby's been killed. He said in a conversation with the Garrison said that Bobby had won California, be allowed today. My same feeling, because no way could they allow him to get back in the president's chair. He was an underdog, not a leading contender until he scored the upset win in California. Better to kill him as a possible nominee than as president.
Craig, the people around the Harper Hospital and Marina, many of them in petrochemical, friends of George Mornshill, were also associated with that white Russian Greek Orthodox church. That's the same church that brought Serhian Syrian.
This is not a question, but some of us are wondering if this has been, if there will be audio recordings available from the booth, good quality audio recordings. And also in the symposium in Dallas last year, I understand that it was not recorded. And I'm just wondering if it will be recorded this year. I guess we find it a little difficult to understand why.
Is Doug hearing them?
I understand it was recorded. Ulrich Shannon in Montreal has quite an extensive list of audio tapes available that you can purchase.
Well, I understand a lot of people did record it with mini cassettes, but a friend of mine called Larry Howard, and Larry said it was not recorded with good quality audio recording tape.
Hey, Doug, you just asked a question. Are audio tapes going to be available?
We're going to make them available as soon as we can put them together and edit it. We're going to put together probably one of just the raw footage from the press conference to the end of this, which will be about 30 hours. And then we're going to probably package a nice edited one with like off-camera interviews with people too. We've done that. We've got a lot of off-camera interviews this weekend also.
Are you going to send out some type of brochure to every person that's listed as a person that attended the conference?
Yeah, not only that, we've got access to 2 mailing lists. As a third decade member, we've got 700 people. I'm sure Jerry will let us do that. And the last Vermont bookstore's got 900. And so we'll it's a good way. We'll get a lot of people with those.
What about the AIC? Get the center to help you on this too, Doug.
Yeah.
Sure.
What about this audio tapes? This is all new to me, and Dave's got the expertise to do that.
Got the audio too.
Yeah, so just use the audio off the video.
You can do it?
Sure.
Now, the question about the asses, I talked with the asses about that. They did take expensive videotapes. The problem that they had was that there were some technical problems involving the shape and so on the stage that interfered a lot with the sound, and they ended up losing a lot of the sound that way. So they went through back on the tapes. They didn't know they were in the phone.
I think we tried this year.
I would assume
Thank you, troubleshooting.
Before I make some last comment, is Craig, please stay for just a moment, Craig. We just want to make certain that if you've been video recording, that you check with security as you leave. I want to thank you for attending and staying to the end, because I really mean this. Craig's performance here and his material was certainly not the least of the materials that we heard throughout the conference. It's on the top of my list now, a priority list. The Texas Connection, the Assassination of John F. Kennedy, and I believe there may be copies available. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Sir, if you could get a microphone.